The Metamorphoses by Ovid. My mind is bent to tell of bodies changed into new forms. O gods, for you yourselves have wrought the changes, breathe on these my undertakings, and bring down my song in unbroken strains from the world's very beginning, even unto the present time. Before the sea was, and the lands, and the sky that hangs over all, the face of nature showed a light in her whole round, which state have men called chaos, a rough, unordered mass of things, nothing at all but lifeless bulk and warring seeds of ill-matched elements heaped in one. No sun as yet shone forth upon the world, nor did the waxing moon renew her slender horns, nor yet did the earth hang poised by her own weight in the circumambient air, nor had the ocean stretched her arms along the far reaches of the lands. And though there was both land in sea and air, no one could tread that land or swim that sea, and the air was dark. No form of things remained the same. All objects were at odds, for within one body, cold things strove with hot, and moist with dry, soft things with hard, things having weight with weightless things. God, or kindlier nature, composed this strife, for he rent asunder land from sky and sea from land, and separated the ethereal heavens from the dense atmosphere. When thus he had released these elements and freed them from the blind heap of things, he set them each in its own place and bound them fast in harmony. The fiery, weightless element that forms heaven's vault leaped up and made place for itself upon the topmost height. Next came the air, in likeness and in place. The earth was heavier than these, and drawing with it the grosser elements, sank to the bottom by its own weight. The streaming water took the last place of all, and held the solid land confined in its embrace. When he, whoever of the gods it was, had thus arranged in order and resolved that chaotic mass, and reduced it, thus resolved, to cosmic parts, he first molded the earth into the form of a mighty ball, so that it might be of light form on every side. Then he bade the waters to spread abroad, to rise in waves beneath the rushing winds, and fling themselves around the shores of the encircled earth. Springs, too, and huge stagnant pools and lakes he made, and hemmed down flowing rivers with their shelving banks, whose waters, each far remote from each, are partly swallowed by the earth itself, and partly flow down to the sea, and being thus received into the expanse of a freer flood, beat now on shores instead of banks. Then did he bid plains to stretch out, valleys to sink down, woods to be clothed in leafage, and the rock-ribbed mountains to arise. And as the celestial vault is cut by 2 zones on the right and 2 on the left, and there is a 5th zone between hotter than these, so did the providence of God mark off the enclosed mass with the same number of zones, and the same tracts were stamped upon the earth. The central zone of these may not be dwelt in by reason of the heat. Deep snow covers 2. 2 he placed between, and gave them temperate climate, mingling heat with cold. The air hung over all, which is as much heavier than fire as the weight of water is lighter than the weight of earth. There did the Creator bid the mists and clouds to take their place, and thunder that should shake the hearts of men, and winds, which, with the thunderbolts, make chilling cold. To these also the world's Creator did not allot the air that they might hold it everywhere. Even as it is, they can scarce be prevented, though they control their blasts, each in his separate tract, from tearing the world to pieces. So fiercely do these brothers strive together. But Eurus drew off to the land of the dawn and the realms of Araby, where the Persian hills flush beneath the morning light. The western shores, which glow with the setting sun, are the place of Zephyrus, while bristling Boreas betook himself to Scythia and the farthest north. The land far opposite is wet with constant fog and rain, the home of Auster, the south wind. Above these all he placed the liquid, weightless ether, which has no trace of earthly dreads. Scarce had he thus parted off all things within the determined bounds, when the stars, which had long been lying hid, crushed down beneath the darkness, began to gleam throughout the sky, and, that no region might be without its own forms of animate life, the stars and divine forms occupied the floor of heaven, the sea fell to the shining fishes for their home, earth received the beasts, and the mobile air the birds. A living creature of finer stuff than these, more capable of lofty thought, one who could have dominion over all the rest, was lacking yet. Then man was born. Whether the God who made all else, designing a more perfect world, made man of his own divine substance, or whether the new earth, but lately drawn away from heavenly ether, retained still some elements of its kindred sky, that earth which the son of Iapetus mixed with fresh running water, and molded into the form of the all-controlling gods. And though all other animals are prone, and fix their gaze upon the earth, he gave to man an uplifted face, and bade him stand erect, and turn his eyes to heaven. So, then, the earth, which had but lately been a rough and formless thing, was changed, and clothed itself with forms of men, before unknown. Golden was that first age, which, with no one to compel, without a law, of its own will kept faith and did the right. There was no fear of punishment, no threatening words were to be read on brazen tablets, no suppliant throng gazed fearfully upon its judge's face, but without judges lived secure. Nor yet had the pine tree felled on its native mountain descended from there into the watery plain to visit other lands. Men knew no shores except their own. Not yet were cities begirt with steep moats. There were no trumpets of straight, no horns of curving brass, no swords or helmets. There was no need at all of armed men, for nations, secure from war's alarms, passed the years in gentle ease. The earth herself, without compulsion, untouched by hoe or plowshare, of herself gave all things needful. And men, content with food which came, with no one seeking, gathered the arbute fruit, strawberries from the mountain sides, cornel cherries, berries hanging thick upon the prickly bramble, and acorns fallen from the spreading tree of Jove. Then spring was everlasting, and gentle zephyrs with warm breath played with the flowers that sprang unplanted. Anon the earth, untilled, brought forth her stores of grain, and the fields, though unfallowed, grew white with the heavy bearded wheat. Streams of milk and streams of sweet nectar flowed, and yellow honey was distilled from the verdant oak. After Saturn had been banished to the dark land of death, and the world was under the sway of Jove, the silver race came in. Lower in the scale than gold, but of greater worth than yellow brass. Jove now shortened the bounds of the old-time spring, and through winter, summer, variable autumn, and brief spring, completed the year in 4 seasons. Then first the parched air glared white with burning heat, and icicles hung down congealed by freezing winds. In that age, men first sought the shelter of houses. Their homes had heretofore been caves, dense thickets, and branches bound together with bark. Then first, the seeds of grain were planted in long furrows, and bullocks groan beneath a heavy yoke. Next after this, and third in order, came the brazen race of sterner disposition, and more ready to fly to arms savage, but not yet impious. The age of hard iron came last. Straightway all evil burst forth into this age of baser vein. Modesty and truth and faith fled the earth, and in their place came tricks and plots and snares, violence and cursed love of gain. Men now spread sails to the winds, though the sailor as yet scarce knew them, and keels of pine which long had stood upon high mountain-sides now leaped insolently over unknown waves, and the ground which had previously been a common possession like the sunlight and the air, the careful surveyor now marked out with long-drawn boundary line. Not only did men demand of the bounteous fields the crops and sustenance they owed, but they delved as well into the very bowels of the earth, and the wealth which the Creator had hidden away and buried deep amid the very Stygian shades was brought to light, wealth that pricks men on to crime. And now baneful iron had come, and gold, more baneful than iron. War came, which fights with both, and brandished in its bloody hands the clashing arms. Men lived on plunder. Guest was not safe from host, nor father-in-law from son-in-law. Even among brothers it was rare to find affection. The husband longed for the death of his wife, she of her husband. Murderous stepmothers brewed deadly poisons, and sons inquired into their fathers' years before the time. Piety lay vanquished, and the maiden Astrea, last of the immortals, abandoned the blood-soaked earth. And, that high heaven might be no safer than the earth, they say that the giants essayed the very throne of heaven, piling huge mountains one on another clear up to the stars. Then the Almighty Father hurled his thunderbolts, shattered Olympus, and dashed Pelion down from underlying Ossa. When those dread bodies lay overwhelmed by their own bulk, they say that Mother Earth, drenched with their streaming blood, informed that warm gore anew with life, and, that some trace of her former offspring might remain, she gave it human form. But this new stock too proved contemptuous of the gods, very greedy for slaughter, and passionate. You might know that they were sons of blood. When Saturn's son from his high throne saw this, he groaned, and recalling the infamous revels of Lycaon's table, a story still unknown because the deed was new, he conceived a mighty wrath worthy the soul of Jove, and summoned a council of the gods. Nothing delayed their answer to the summons. There is a high way, easily seen when the sky is clear. It is called the Milky Way, famed for its shining whiteness. By this way the gods fare to the halls and royal dwelling of the mighty Thunder. On either side, the palaces of the gods of higher rank are thronged with guests through folding doors flung wide. The lesser gods dwell apart from these. Fronting on this way, the illustrious and strong heavenly gods have placed their homes. This is the place which, if I may make bold to say it, I would not fear to call the Palatia of high heaven. So, when the gods had taken their seats within the marble council chamber, the king himself, seated high above the rest and leaning on his ivory scepter, shook thrice and again his awful lot, with which he moved the land and sea and sky. Then he opened his indignant lips, and thus spoke he. I was not more troubled than now for the sovereignty of the world, when each one of the serpent-footed giants was in act to lay his 100 hands upon the captive sky. For, Although that was a savage enemy, their whole attack sprung from one body and one source. But now, wherever old Ocean roars around the earth, I must destroy the race of men. By the infernal streams that glide beneath the earth through Stygian groves, I swear that I have already tried all other means. But that which is incurable must be cut away with a knife, so the untainted part does not also draw infection. I have demigods, rustic divinities, nymphs, fauns, and satyrs, and sylvan deities upon the mountain slopes. Since we do not yet esteem them worthy the honor of a place in heaven, let us at least allow them to dwell in safety in the lands allotted them. Or do you think that they will be safe when against me, who wield the thunderbolt, who have and rule you as my subjects, Lycaon, well known for savagery, has laid his snares? All trembled, and with eager zeal demanded him who had been guilty of such bold infamy. So, when an impious band was mad to blot out the name of Rome with Caesar's blood, the human race was dazed with a mighty fear of sudden ruin, and the whole world shuddered in horror. Nor is the loyalty of your subjects, Augustus, less pleasing to you than that was to Jove. After he, by word and gesture, had checked their outcry, all held their peace. When now the clamor had subsided, checked by his royal authority, Jove once more broke the silence with these words. He has indeed been punished. Have no care for that. But what he did and what his punishment, I will relate. An infamous report of the age had reached my ears. Eager to prove this false, I descended from high Olympus, and as a god disguised in human form, traveled up and down the land. It would take too long to recount how the great impiety was found on every hand. The infamous report was far less than the truth. I had crossed Minla, bristling with the lairs of beasts, Silene, and the pine groves of chill Lycius. Then I approached the seat and inhospitable abode of the Arcadian king, just as the late evening shades were ushering in the night. I gave a sign that a god had come, and the common folk began to worship me. Lycaon at first mocked at their pious prayers, and then he said, I will soon find out, and that by a plain test, whether this fellow be god or mortal. Nor shall the truth be at all in doubt. He planned that night, while I was heavy with sleep, to kill me by an unexpected murderous attack. Such was the experiment he adopted to test the truth. And not content with that, he took a hostage who had been sent by the Molossian race, cut his throat, and some parts of him still warm with life he boiled, and others he roasted over the fire. But no sooner had he placed these before me on the table than I, with my avenging bolt, overthrew the house upon its master and on his equally unworthy household gods. The king himself flies in terror, and gaining the silent fields howls aloud, attempting in vain to speak. His mouth of itself gathers foam, and with his accustomed greed for blood, he turns against the sheep, delighting still in slaughter. His garments change to shaggy hair, his arms to leads. He turns into a wolf, and yet retains some traces of his former shape. There is the same gray hair, the same fierce face, the same gleaming eyes, the same picture of beastly savagery. One house has fallen, but not one house alone has deserved to perish. Whatever the plains of earth extend, the Furies reign supreme. You would deem it a conspiracy of crime. Let them all pay, and quickly too, the penalties which they have deserved. So stands my purpose. When he had done, Some proclaimed their approval of his words and added fuel to his wrath, while others played their parts by giving silent consent. And yet they all grieved over the threatened loss of the human race, and asked what would be the state of the world bereft of mortals. Who would bring incense to their altars? Was he planning to give over the world to the wild beasts to despoil? As they thus questioned, their king bade them be of good cheer, for the rest should be in his care. For he would give them another race of wondrous origin, far different from the first. And now he was set to hurl his thunderbolts against the whole world. But he stayed his hand in fear, unless perhaps the sacred heaven should take fire from so huge a conflagration, and burn from pole to pole. He remembered also that it was in the fates, that a time would come when sea and land, the unkindled palace of the sky, and the beleaguered structure of the universe should be destroyed by fire. And so he laid aside the bolts which Cyclopean hands had forged. He preferred a different punishment, to destroy the human race beneath the waves, and to send down rain from every quarter of the sky. Straightway he shuts the north wind up in the cave of Aeolus, and all blasts soever that put the clouds to flight. But he lets the south wind loose. Forth flies the south wind with dripping wings, his awful face shrouded in pitchy darkness. His beard is heavy with rain, water flows in streams down his hoary locks. Dark clouds rest upon his brow, while his wings and garments drip with dew. And when he presses the low-hanging clouds with his broad hands, a crashing sound goes forth. And next, the dense clouds pour forth their rain. Iris, the messenger of Juno, clad in robes of many hues, draws up water and feeds it to the clouds. The standing grain is overthrown. The crops which have been the object of the farmer's prayers lie ruined, and the hard labor of the tedious year has come to nothing. The wrath of Jove is not content with the waters from his own sky. His sea-god brother aids him with auxiliary waves. He summons his rivers to council. When these have assembled at the palace of their king, he says, "Now is no time to employ a long harangue. Put forth all your strength, for there is need. Open wide your doors, away with all restraining dikes, and give full rein to all your river steeds." So he commands, and the rivers return, uncurb their fountains' mouths, and in unbridled course go racing to the sea. Neptune himself smites the earth with his trident. She trembles, and at the stroke flings open wide a way for the waters. The rivers overleap all bounds and flood the open plains. And not only orchards, crops, and herds, men and dwellings, but shrines as well, and their sacred contents do they sweep away. If any house has stood firm, and has been able to resist that huge misfortune undestroyed, still do the overtopping waves cover its roof, and its towers lie hid beneath the flood. And now the sea and land have no distinction. All is sea, but a sea without a shore. Here, one man seeks a hilltop in his flight. Another sits in his curved skiff, plying the oars where lately he has plowed. One sails over his fields of grain, or the roof of his buried farmhouse, and one takes fish caught in the elm tree's top. And sometimes it chanced that an anchor was embedded in a grassy meadow, where the curving keels brushed over the vineyard tops, and where but now the slender goats had browsed, the ugly sea calves rested. The Nereids are amazed to see beneath the water groves and cities and the haunts of men. The dolphins invade the woods, brushing against the high branches and shake the oak trees as they knock against them in their course. The wolf swims among the sheep, while tawny lions and tigers are borne along by the waves. Neither does the power of his lightning stroke avail the boar, nor his swift limbs the stag, since both are alike swept away by the flood. And the wandering bird, after long searching for a place to alight, falls with weary wings into the sea. The sea in unchecked liberty has now buried all the hills, and strange waves now beat upon the mountain peaks. Most living things are drowned outright. Those who have escaped the water, slow starvation at last overcomes through lack of food. The land of Focus separates the Boeotian from the Aegean fields, a fertile land, while still it was a land. But at that time it was but a part of the sea, a broad expanse of sudden waters. There, Mount Parnassus lifts its 2 peaks skyward, high and steep, piercing the clouds. When here Deucalion and his wife, born in a little skiff, had come to land, for the sea had covered all things else, they first worshipped the Carycian nymphs and the mountain deities, and the goddess, fate-revealing Themis, who in those days kept the oracles. There was no better man than he, none more scrupulous of right, nor than she was any woman more reverent of the gods. When now Jove saw that the world was all one stagnant pool, and that only one man was left from those who were but now so many thousands, and that but one woman too was left, both innocent, and both worshippers of God, he rent the clouds asunder, and when these had been swept away by the north wind, he showed the land once more to the sky, and the heavens to the land. Then too the anger of the sea subsides, when the sea's great ruler lays by his free-pronged spear, and calms the waves, and calling sea-hued Triton, showing forth above the deep, his shoulders thick overgrown with shellfish, he bids him blow into his loud resounding conch, and by that signal to recall the floods and streams. He lifts his hollow, twisted shell, which grows from the least and lowest to a broad swelling whorl, the shell which, when in mid-sea it has received the Triton's breath, fills with its notes the shores that lie beneath the rising and the setting sun. So then, when it had touched the sea-god's lips wet with his dripping beard, and sounded forth the retreat which had been ordered, it was heard by all the waters, both of land and sea. And all the waters by which it was heard, it held in check. Now the sea has shores. The rivers, bank full, keep within their channels. The floods subside, and hilltops spring into view. Land rises up, the ground increasing as the waves decrease. And now, at length, after long burial, the trees show their uncovered tops, whose leaves still hold the slime which the flood has left. The world was indeed restored. But when Deucalion saw that it was an empty world, and that deep silence filled the desolated lands, he burst into tears and thus addressed his wife. "Oh, sister, oh, my wife, oh, only woman left on earth, you, whom the ties of common race and family, whom the marriage couch has joined to me, and whom now our very perils join. Of all the lambs which the rising and the setting sun behold, we, too, are the throng. The sea holds all the rest, and even this hold which we have upon our life is not as yet sufficiently secure. Even yet the clouds strike terror to my heart. What would be your feelings now, poor soul, if the fates had willed that you be rescued all alone? How would you bear your fear alone? Who would console your grief? For be assured that if the sea held you also, I would follow you, my wife, and the sea should hold me also. Oh, would that by my father's arts I might restore the nations, and breathe as did he the breath of life into the molded clay. But as it is, on us, too, only, depends the human race. Such is the will of heaven, and we remain sole samples of mankind. He spoke, and when they had wept a while, they resolved to appeal to the heavenly power and seek his aid through sacred oracles. Without delay, side by side, they went to the water of Kephasis' stream, which, while not yet clear, still flowed within their familiar banks. From this they took some drops and sprinkled them on head and clothing. So having done, they bent their steps to the goddess's sacred shrine, whose gables were still discolored with foul moss, and upon whose altars the fires were dead. When they had reached the temple steps, they both fell prone upon the ground, and with trembling lips kissed the chill stone and said, "If deities are appeased by the prayers of the righteous, if the wrath of the gods is thus turned aside, O Themis, tell us by what means our race may be restored, and bring aid, O most merciful, to a world overwhelmed." The goddess was moved, and gave this oracle: "Depart from here, and with veiled heads and loosened robes, throw behind you as you go the bones of your great mother." Long they stand in dumb amaze, and first Pyrrha breaks the silence and refuses to obey the bidding of the goddess. With trembling lips she prays for pardon, but dares not outrage her mother's ghost by treating her bones as she is bid. Meanwhile, they go over again the words of the oracle, which had been given so full of dark perplexities, and turn them over and over in their minds. At last, Prometheus' son comforts the daughter of Epimetheus with reassuring words. "Either my wit is at fault, or else oracles are holy and never counsel guilt. Our great mother is the earth, and I think that the bones which the goddess speaks of are the stones in the earth's body. It is these that we are bidden to throw behind us." Although Pyrrha is moved by her husband's surmise, yet hope still wavers. So distrustful are they both as to the heavenly command. But what harm will it do to try? They go down, veil their heads, ungird their robes, and throw stones behind them, just as the goddess had bidden. And the stones, who would believe it unless ancient tradition vouched for it, began at once to lose their hardness and stiffness, to grow soft slowly, and, softened, to take on form. Then, when they had grown in size and become milder in their nature, a certain likeness to the human form indeed could be seen, still not very clear, but such as statues just begun out of marble have, not sharply defined, and very like roughly blocked out images. That part of them, however, which was earthy and damp, with slight moisture, was changed to flesh, but what was solid and incapable of bending became bone, and which was but now veins remained under the same name, and in a short time, through the operation of the divine will, the stones thrown by the man's hand took on the form of men, and women were made from the stones the woman threw. From this comes the hardness of our race and our endurance of toil, and we give proof from what origin we are sprung. As to the other forms of animal life, the earth spontaneously produced these of divers kinds. After that old moisture remaining from the flood had grown warm from the rays of the sun, The slime of the wet marshes swelled with heat, and the fertile seeds of life, nourished in that life-giving soil, as in a mother's womb, grew, and in time took on some special form. So when the seven-mouthed Nile has receded from the drenched fields and has returned again to its former bed, and the fresh slime has been heated by the sun's rays, farmers as they turn over the lumps of earth find many animate things, and among these some, but now begun, are upon the very verge of life. Some are unfinished and lacking in their proper parts, and oft-times in the same body. One part is alive and the other still nothing but raw earth. For when moisture and heat unite, life is conceived, and from these two sources all living things spring. And though fire and water are naturally at enmity, still heat and moisture produce all things, and this inharmonious harmony is fitted to the growth of life. When, therefore, the earth, covered with mud from the recent flood, became heated up by the hot and genial rays of the sun, she brought forth innumerable forms of life. In part, she restored the ancient shapes, and in part, she created creatures new and strange. She indeed would have wished not to do so, but you also she then bore. You, huge python, you snake unknown before, who was a terror to new created men, so huge a space of mountainside did you fill. This monster, the god of the glittering bow, destroyed with arms never before used except against does and wild she-goats, crushing him with countless darts, nearly emptying his quiver, till the creature's poisonous blood flowed from the black wounds. And that the fame of his deed might not perish through lapse of time, he instituted sacred games whose contests throngs beheld, called Pythian, from the name of the serpent he had overthrown. At these games every youth who had been victorious in boxing, running, or the chariot race received the honor of an oaken garland, for as yet the laurel tree was not, and Phoebus was wont to wreathe his temples, comely with flowing locks, with the garland from any tree. Now the first love of Phoebus was Daphne, daughter of Peneus, the river god. It was no blind chance that gave this love, but the malicious wrath of Cupid. Delian Apollo, while still exulting over his conquest of the serpent, had seen him bending his bow with tight-drawn string and had said, "What have you to do with the arms of men, you wanton boy? That weapon befits my shoulders, for I have strength to give unerring wounds to the wild beasts, my foes, and have but now laid low the python swollen with countless darts covering whole acres with plague-engendering form. You ought to be content with your torch to light the hidden fires of love, and not lay claim to my honors." And to him Venus' son replied, "Your dart may pierce all things else, Apollo, but mine shall pierce you. And by as much as all living things are less than gods, by so much less is your glory than mine." So saying, he shook his wings and, dashing upward through the air, quickly alighted on the shady peak of Parnassus. There he took from his quiver two darts of opposite effect. One puts to flight, the other kindles the flame of love. The one which kindles love is of gold and has a sharp gleaming point. The other is blunt and tipped with lead. This last the god fixed in the heart of Peneus' daughter, but with the other he smote Apollo, piercing even unto the bones and marrow. Straightway he burned with love. But she fled the very name of love, rejoicing in the deep fastnesses of the woods and in the spoils of beasts which she had snared, vying with the virgin Phoebe. A single fillet bound her locks, all unarranged. Many sought her, but she, averse to all suitors, impatient of control and without thought for man, roamed the pathless woods, nor cared at all that hymen, love, or wedlock might be. Often her father said, "Daughter, you owe me a son-in-law," and often, "Daughter, you owe me grandsons." But she, hating the wedding torch as if it were a thing of evil, would blush rosy red over her fair face, and clinging around her father's neck with coaxing arms would say, "O father dearest, grant me to enjoy perpetual virginity. Her father has already granted this to Diana." He, indeed, yielded to her request. But that beauty of yours, Daphne, forbade the fulfillment of your desire, and your form did not fit with your prayer. Phoebus loves Daphne at sight, and longs to wed her. And what he longs for, that he hopes, and his own gifts of prophecy deceive him. And as the stubble of the harvested grain is kindled, as hedges burn with the torches which some traveler has chanced to put too near, or has gone off and left at break of day, so was the god consumed with flames, so did he burn in all his heart, and feed his fruitless love on hope. He looks at her hair hanging down her neck in disarray and says, "What if it were arrayed?" He gazes at her eyes gleaming like stars. He gazes upon her lips, which, but to gaze on, does not satisfy. He marvels at her fingers, hands, and wrists, and her arms bare to the shoulder. And what is hid, he deems still lovelier. But she flees him swifter than the fleeting breeze, nor does she stop when he calls after her. "O nymph, O Peneus' daughter, stay! I who pursue you am no enemy, oh stay! So does the lamb flee from the wolf, the deer from the lion, so do doves on fluttering wing flee from the eagle, so every creature flees its foes. But love is the cause of my pursuit. Ah me, I fear that you will fall, or brambles mar your innocent limbs, and I be cause of pain to you. The region here is rough through which you hurry. Run with less speed, I pray, and hold your flight. I too will follow with less speed. No, stop and ask who your lover is. I am no mountain dweller, no shepherd, no unkempt guardian here of flocks and herds. You do not know, rash one, you do not know from whom you flee, and for that reason you do flee. Mine is the Delphian land, and Claras, Tenedos, and the realm of Patara acknowledge me as lord. Jove is my father. By me, what shall be has been, and what is are all revealed. By me, the lyre responds in harmony to song. My arrow is sure of aim. But oh, one arrow, surer than my own, has wounded my heart, but now so fancy-free. The art of medicine is my discovery. I am called help-bringer throughout the world, and all the potency of herbs is given unto me. Alas, that love is curable by no herbs, and the arts which heal all others cannot heal their lord." He would have said more, but the maiden pursued her frightened way and left him with his words unfinished, even in her desertion, seeming fair. The winds bared her limbs, the opposing breezes set her garments aflutter as she ran, and a light air flung her locks streaming behind her. Her beauty was enhanced by flight. But the chase drew to an end, for the youthful god would no longer waste his time in coaxing words, and urged on by love he pursued at utmost speed, just as when a Gallic hound has seen a hare in an open plain, and seeks his prey on flying feet, but the hare's safety, he, just about to fasten on her now, even now thinks he has her, and grazes her very heels with his outstretched muzzle. But she knows not whether she be not already caught, and barely escapes from those sharp fangs, and leaves behind the jaws just closing on her. So ran the god and maid. He sped by hope, and she by fear. But he ran the more swiftly, borne on the wings of love, gave her no time to rest, hung over her fleeing shoulders, and breathed on the hair that streamed over her neck. Now was her strength all gone, and pale with fear and utterly overcome by the toil of her swift flight, seeing her father's waters near, she cried, "O Father, help! If your waters hold divinity, change and destroy this beauty by which I please too well." Scarce had she thus prayed, when a down-dragging numbness seized her limbs, and her soft sides were begirt with thin bark. Her hair was changed to leaves, her arms to branches, her feet, but now so swift, grew fast in sluggish roots, and her head was now but a tree's top. Her gleaming beauty alone remained. But even now, in this new form, Apollo loved her, and placing his hand upon the trunk, he felt the heart still fluttering beneath the bark. He embraced the branches as if human limbs, and pressed his lips upon the wood. But even the wood shrank from his kisses, and the god cried out to this, "Since you cannot be my bride, you shall at least be my tree. My hair, my lyre, my quiver shall always be entwined with you, O laurel. With you shall Roman generals wreathe their heads, when shouts of joy shall acclaim their triumph, and long processions climb the Capitol. You, at Augustus's portal, shall stand a trusty guardian, and keep watch over the civic crown of oak which hangs between. And as my head is ever young, and my locks unshorn, so you must keep the beauty of your leaves perpetual." Paean was done. The laurel waved her new-made branches, and seemed to move her head-like top in full consent. There is a vale in Thessaly, which steep wooded slopes surround on every side. Men call it Tempe. Through this, the river Peneus flows from the foot of Pindus with foam-flecked waters, and by its heavy falls forms clouds, which drive along fine smoke-like mist, sprinkles the tops of the trees with spray, and deafens even remoter regions by its roar. Here is the home, the seat, the inmost haunt of the mighty stream. Here, seated in a cave of overhanging rock, he was giving laws to his waters and to his water nymphs. To here came first the rivers of his own country, not knowing whether to congratulate or to console the father of Daphne. The poplar-fringed Spercheius, the restless Enipeus, hoary Epidnus, gentle Amphresis, and Aeus, and later all the rivers which by whatsoever way their current carries them, lead down their waters, weary with wandering into the sea. Inachus only does not come, but hidden away in his deepest cave he augments his waters with his tears, and in utmost wretchedness laments his daughter, Io, as lost. He knows not whether she still lives or is among the shades, but since he cannot find her anywhere, he thinks she must be nowhere, and his anxious soul forebodes things worse than death. Now Jove had seen her returning from her father's stream, and said, "O maiden, worthy the love of Jove, and destined to make some husband happy, seek now the shade of these deep woods," and he pointed to the shady woods, "while the sun at his zenith's height is overworn. But if you fear to go alone among the haunts of wild beasts, under a god's protection you shall tread in safety, even the inmost woods. Nor am I of the common gods, but I am he who holds high heaven's scepter in his mighty hand, and hurls the roaming thunderbolts. Oh, do not flee from me!" For she was already in flight. Now she had left behind the pasture fields of Lerna, and the Lycian plains thick set with trees, when the god hid the wide land in a thick dark cloud, caught the fleeing maid, and ravished her. Meanwhile, Juno chanced to look down upon the midst of Argos, and marveled that quick-rising clouds had wrought the aspect of night in the clear light of day. She knew that they were not river mists nor fogs exhaled from the damp earth, and at once she glanced around to see where her lord might be, as one who knew well his oft-discovered wiles. When she could not find him in the sky, she said, "Either I am mistaken, or I am being wronged." And gliding down from the top of heaven, she stood upon the earth and bade the clouds disperse. But Jove had felt beforehand his spouse's coming, and had changed the daughter of Inachus into a white heifer. Even in this form, she still was beautiful. Saturnia looked a while upon the heifer in grudging admiration, then asked who she was and from where she came, or from what herd, as if she did not know full well. Jove lyingly declared that she had sprung from the earth, that so he might forestall all further questions as to her origin. Thereupon Saturnia asked for the heifer as a gift. What should he do? It would be a cruel task to surrender his love, but not to do so would arouse suspicion. Shame on one side prompts to give her up, but love on the other urges not. Shame by love would have been overcome, but if so poor a gift as a heifer were refused to her, who was both his sister and his wife, perhaps she had seen to be no heifer. Though her rival was at last given up, the goddess did not at once put off all suspicion, for she feared Jove in further treachery, until she had given her over to Argus, the son of Arestor, to keep for her. Now Argus his head was set about with 100 eyes, which took their rest in sleep, 2 at a time in turn, while the others watched and remained on guard. In whatsoever way he stood, he looked at Io, and even when his back was turned, he had Io before his eyes. In the daytime he allowed her to graze, but when the sun had set beneath the earth, he shut her up and tied an ignominious halter round her neck. She fed on leaves of trees and bitter herbs, and instead of a couch, the poor thing lay upon the ground, which was not always grassy, and drank water from the muddy streams. When she strove to stretch out suppliant arms to Argus, she had no arms to stretch, and when she attempted to voice her complaints, she only mooed. She would start with fear at the sound, and was filled with terror at her own voice. She came also to the bank of her father's stream, where she used to play. But when she saw, reflected in the water, her gaping jaws and sprouting horns, she fled in very terror of herself. Her naiad sisters knew not who she was, nor yet her father Inachus himself. But she followed him and her sisters, and offered herself to be petted and admired. Old Inachus had plucked some grass and held it out to her. She licked her father's hand and tried to kiss it. She could not restrain her tears, and if only she could speak, she would tell her name and sad misfortune and beg for aid. But instead of words, she did tell the sad story of her changed form, with letters which she traced in the dust with her hoof. "Ah, woe is me!" exclaimed her father Inachus, and clinging to the weeping heifer's horns and snow-white neck. "Oh, woe is me! Are you indeed my daughter whom I have sought all over the earth? You would have been a lighter grief unfound than found. You are silent, and give me back no answer to my words. You only heave deep sighs, and what alone you can, you moo in reply. I, in blissful ignorance, was preparing marriage rites for you, and had hopes, first of a son-in-law, and then of grandchildren. But now from the herd must I find you a husband, and from the herd must I look for grandchildren. And even by death I may not end by crushing woes. It is a dreadful thing to be a god, for the door of death is shut to me, and my grief must go on without end." As they thus wept together, star-eyed Argus separated them, and drove the daughter torn from her father's arms to more distant pastures. There he perched himself apart upon a high mountain top, where at his ease he could keep watch on every side. But now the ruler of the heavenly ones can no longer bear these great sufferings of Io, and he calls his son, whom the shining Pleiad bore, and bids him do Argus to death. Without delay, Mercury puts on his winged sandals, takes in his potent hand his sleep-producing wand, and dons his magic cap. Thus arrayed, the son of Jove leaps down from the sky to earth, where he removes his cap and lays aside his wings. Only his wand he keeps. With this, in the character of a shepherd, through the sequestered country paths he drives a flock of goats which he has collected as he came along, and plays upon his reed pipe as he goes. Juno's guardsman is greatly taken with the strange sound. "You there," he calls, "whoever you are, you might as well sit beside me on this rock, for nowhere is there richer grass for the flock, and you see that there is shade convenient for shepherds." So Atlas's grandson takes his seat, and fills the passing hours with talk of many things, and by making music on his pipe of reeds he tries to overcome those watchful eyes. But Argus strives valiantly against his slumberous languor, and though he allows some of his eyes to sleep, still he continues to watch with the others. He asks also how the reed pipe came to be invented, for at that time it had but recently been invented. Then said the god, "On Arcadia's cool mountain slopes, among the wood nymphs who dwell on Nonacris, there was one much sought by suitors. Her sister nymphs called her Syrinx. More than once she had eluded the pursuit of satyrs, and all the gods who dwell either in the bosky woods or fertile fields, but she patterned after the Delian goddess in her pursuits, and above all, in her life of maidenhood. When girt after the manner of Diana, she would deceive the beholder, and could be mistaken for Latona's daughter, were not her bow of horn, were not Diana's of gold. But even so she was mistaken for the goddess. One day Pan saw her as she was coming back from Mount Lycaeus, his head wreathed with a crown of sharp pine needles, and thus addressed her. It remained still to tell what he said, and to relate how the nymph, spurning his prayers, fled through the pathless wastes until she came to Ladon's stream flowing peacefully along his sandy banks. How here, when the water checked her further flight, she besought her sisters of the stream to change her form, and how Pan, when now he thought he had caught Syrinx, instead of her held nothing but marsh reeds in his arms, and while he sighed in disappointment, the soft air stirring in the reeds gave forth a low and complaining sound. Touched by this wonder and charmed by the sweet tones, the god exclaimed, "This union at least shall I have with you." And so the pipes, made of unequal reeds fitted together by a joining of wax, took and kept the name of the maiden. When Mercury was going on to tell this story, he saw that all those eyes had yielded and were closed in sleep. Straightway he checks his words, and deepens Argus's slumber by passing his magic wand over those sleep-faint eyes. And at once he strikes with his hooked sword the nodding head just where it joins the neck, and sends it bleeding down the rocks, defiling the rugged cliff with blood. Argus, you now lie low. The light which you had within your many fires is all put out, and one darkness fills your 100 eyes. Saturnia took these eyes and set them on the feathers of her bird, filling his tail with star-like jewels. Straightway she flamed with anger, nor did she delay the fulfillment of her wrath. She set a terror-bearing fury to work before the eyes and heart of her Grecian rival, planted deep within her breast a goading fear, and sent her fleeing in terror through all the world. You alone, O Nile, did close her boundless toil. When she reached the stream, She flung herself down on her knees upon the river bank. With head thrown back she raised her face, which was all she could raise, to the high stars, and with groans and tears and agonized mooing she seemed to voice her griefs to Jove, and to beg him to end her woes. Thereupon Jove threw his arms about his spouse's neck, and begged her at last to end her vengeance, saying, "Lay aside all fear for the future. She shall never be source of grief to you again." And he called upon the Stygian pools to witness his oath. The goddess's wrath is soothed. Io gains back her former looks and becomes what she was before. The rough hair falls away from her body, her horns disappear, her great round eyes grow smaller, her gaping mouth is narrowed, her shoulders and her hands come back, and the hoofs are gone, being changed each into 5 nails. No trace of the heifer is left in her, except only the fair whiteness of her body. And now the nymph, able at last to stand upon 2 feet, stands erect, yet fears to speak, in case she moo in the heifer's way, and with fear and trembling she resumes her long-abandoned speech. Now, with fullest service she is worshipped as a goddess by the linen-robed throng. A son, Epiphus, was born to her, thought to have sprung at length from the seed of mighty Jove, and throughout the cities dwelt in temples with his mother. He had a companion of like mind and age named Phaeton, child of the sun. When this Phaeton was once speaking proudly and refused to give way to him, boasting that Phoebus was his father, the grandson of Inachus rebelled and said, "You are a fool to believe all your mother tells you, and are swelled up with false notions about your father." Phaeton grew red with rage, but repressed his anger through very shame, and carried Epiphus's insulting taunt straight to his mother, Clymene. "And that you may grieve the more, mother," he said, "I, the high-spirited, the bold of tongue, had no word to say. Ashamed am I that such an insult could have been uttered, and yet could not be answered. But do you, if I am indeed sprung from heavenly seed, give me a proof of my high birth, and justify my claims to divine origin." So spoke the lad, and threw his arms around his mother's neck, begging her, by his own and Merip's life, by his sister's nuptial torches, to give him some sure token of his birth. Clymene, moved, it is uncertain whether by the prayers of Phaeton, or more by anger at the insult to herself, stretched out both arms to heaven, and turning her eyes on the bright sun, exclaimed, "By the splendor of that radiant orb which both hears and sees me now, I swear to you, my boy, that you are sprung from the sun, that being whom you behold, that being who sways the world. If I speak not the truth, may I never see him more, and may this be the last time my eyes shall look upon the light of day. But it is not difficult for you yourself to find your father's house. The place where he rises is not far from our own land. If you are so minded, go there and ask your question of the sun himself." Phaeton leaps up in joy at his mother's words, already grasping the heavens in imagination. And after crossing his own Ethiopia and the land of Ind lying close beneath the sun, he quickly comes to his father's rising place. Book 2. The palace of the sun stood high on lofty columns, bright with glittering gold and bronze that shone like fire. Gleaming ivory crowned the gables above. The double folding doors were radiant with burnished silver, and the workmanship was more beautiful than the material. For upon the doors Mulciber had carved in relief the waters that enfold the central earth, the circle of the lands, and the sky that overhangs the lands. The sea holds the dark-hued gods, tuneful Triton, changeful Proteus, and Aegean, his strong arms thrown over a pair of huge whales. Doris and her daughters, some of whom are shown swimming through the water, some sitting on a rock drying their green hair, and some riding on fishes. They have not all the same appearance, and yet not altogether different, as it should be with sisters. The land has men and cities, woods and beasts, rivers, nymphs, and other rural deities. Above these scenes was placed a representation of the shining sky, 6 signs of the zodiac on the right-hand doors, and 6 signs on the left. Now when Clymene's son had climbed the steep path which leads to there, and had come beneath the roof of his sire, whose fatherhood had been questioned, straightway he turned him to his father's face, but halted some little space away, for he could not bear the radiance at a nearer view. Clad in a purple robe, Phoebus sat on his throne gleaming with brilliant emeralds. To right and left stood day and month, and year and century, and the hours set at equal distances. Young spring was there wreathed with a floral crown, summer all unclad with garland of ripe grain. Autumn was there stained with the trodden grape, and icy winter with white and bristly locks. Seated in the midst of these, the sun, with the eyes which behold all things, looked on the youth, filled with terror at the strange new sights, and said, "Why have you come? What do you seek in this high dwelling, Phaeton? A son no father need deny." The lad replied, "O common light of this vast universe, Phoebus my father, if you grant me the right to use that name, if Clymene is not hiding her shame beneath an unreal pretense, grant me a proof, my father, by which all may know me for your true son, and take away this uncertainty from my mind." He spoke, and his father put off his glittering crown of light, and bade the boy draw nearer. Embracing him, he said, "You are both worthy to be called my son, and Clymene has told you your true origin. And that you may not doubt my word, ask what gift you'd like, that you may receive it from my hand. And may that Stygian pool, whereby gods swear, but which my eyes have never seen, be witness of my promise." Scarce had he ceased when the boy asked for his father's chariot, and the right to drive his winged horses for a day. The father repented him of his oath. Thrice and again he shook his bright head and said, "Your words have proved mine to have been rashly said. If only I might retract my promise, for I confess, my son, that this alone would I refuse you. But I may at least strive to dissuade you. What you desire is not safe. You ask too great a gift, Phaeton, and one which does not befit your strength, and those so boyish years. Your lot is mortal. Not for mortals is what you ask. In your simple ignorance, you claim more than can be granted to the gods themselves. Though each of them may do as he will, yet none but myself has power to take his place in my chariot of fire. No, even the Lord of great Olympus, who hurls dread thunderbolts with his awful hand, could not drive this chariot. And what have we greater than Jove? The first part of the road is steep, up which my steeds in all their morning freshness can scarce make their way. In mid-heaven it is exceeding high. To look down on sea and land from there oft times causes even me to tremble, and my heart to quake with throbbing fear. The last part of the journey is precipitous, and needs an assured control. Even then, Tethys, who receives me in her underlying waters, is wont to fear in case I fall headlong. Furthermore, the vault of the heavens spins round in constant motion, drawing along the lofty stars which it whirls at dizzy speed. I make my way against this, nor does the swift motion which overcomes all else overcome me. But I drive clear contrary to the swift circuit of the universe. Suppose you have my chariot. What will you do? Will you be able to make your way against the whirling poles, that their swift axis will not sweep you away? Perhaps, too, you imagine there are groves there, and cities of the gods and temples full of rich gifts? But no, the course lies amid lurking dangers and fierce beasts of prey. And if you should hold the way, and not go straying from the course, still you shall pass the horned bull full in your path, the Haemonian archer, the maw of the raging lion, the scorpion curving his savage arms in long sweeps, and the crab reaching out in the opposite direction. Nor is it an easy thing for you to control the steeds hot with those strong fires which they have within their breasts, which they breathe out from mouth and nostrils. Scarce do they suffer my control, when their fierce spirits have become heated, and their necks rebel against the reins. But you, O son, beware in case I be the giver of a fatal gift to you, and while there is still time, amend your prayer. Do you truly seek sure pledges that you are a son of mine? Behold, I give sure pledges by my very fear. I show myself your father by my fatherly anxiety. See, look upon my face. And oh, if you could only look into my heart as well, and understand a father's cares therein. Then look around, see all that the rich world holds, and from those great and boundless codes of land and sea and sky, ask anything. I will deny you nothing. But this one thing I beg you not to ask, which, if rightly understood, is a bane instead of blessing, a bane, my Phaeton, that you seek as a boon. Why do you throw your coaxing arms about my neck, you foolish boy? No, doubt it not, it shall be given. I have sworn it by the Styx, whatever you choose, but oh, make a wiser choice. The father's warning ended. Yet he fought against the words and urged his first request, burning with desire to drive the chariot. So then the father, delaying as far as might be, led forth the youth to that high chariot, the work of Vulcan. Its axle was of gold, the pole of gold, its wheels had golden tires and a ring of silver spokes. Along the yoke, chrysolites and jewels, set in fair array, gave back their bright glow to the reflected rays of Phoebus. Now, while the ambitious Phaeton is gazing in wonder at the workmanship, behold, Aurora, who keeps watch in the reddening dawn, has opened wide her purple gates, and her courts glowing with rosy light. The stars all flee away, and the morning star closes their ranks as last of all he departs from his watchtower in the sky. When Titan saw him setting and the world grow red, and the slender horns of the waning moon fading from sight, he bade the swift hours to yoke his steeds. The goddesses quickly did his bidding, and led the horses from their lofty stalls, breathing forth fire, and filled with ambrosial food, and they put upon them the clanking bridles. Then the father anointed his son's face with the sacred ointment, and made it proof against the devouring flames. And he placed upon his head the radiant crown, heaving deep sighs the while, presaging woe, and said, "If you can at least obey your father's warnings, spare the lash, my boy, and more strongly use the reins. The horses hasten of their own accord. The hard task is to check their eager feet, and do not take your way straight through the 5 zones of heaven. The true path runs slantwise, with a wide curve, and confined within the limits of 3 zones, avoids the southern heavens, and the far north as well. This is your route. The track of my wheels you will clearly see, and, that the sky and earth may have equal heat, Go not too low, nor yet direct your course along the top of heaven, for if you go too high you will burn up the skies, if too low, the earth. In the middle is the safest path. And do not turn off too far to the right, towards the writhing serpent, nor on the left, where the altar lies low in the heavens guide your wheel. Hold on between the two. I commit all else to fortune, and may she aid you and guide you better than you guide yourself. While I am speaking, dewy night has reached her goal on the far western shore. We may no longer delay. We are summoned. Behold, the dawn is glowing, and the shadows all have fled. Here, grasp the reins, or if your purpose still may be amended, take my counsel, not my chariot, while you still can, while you still stand on solid ground, before you have mounted to the car which you have in ignorance foolishly desired. Let me give light to the world, which you may see in safety. But the lad has already mounted the swift chariot, and standing proudly, he takes the reins with joy into his hands, and thanks his unwilling father for the gift. Meanwhile, the some swift horses, Pyrrhus, Eos, Ephon, and the fourth, Phledon, fill all the air with their fiery whinnying, and paw impatiently against their bars. When Tethys, ignorant of her grandson's fate, dropped these and gave free course through the boundless skies, the horses dashed forth, and with swift flying feet rent the clouds in their path, and borne aloft upon their wings, they passed the east winds that have their rising in the same quarter. But the weight was light, not such as the horses of the sun could feel, and the yoke lacked its accustomed burden. And as curved ships without their proper ballast roll in the waves, and unstable because too light are borne out of their course, so the chariot without its accustomed burden gives leaps into the air, is tossed aloft, and is like a riderless car. When they feel this, the team run wild and lead the well-beaten track, and fare no longer in the same course as before. The driver is panic-stricken. He knows not how to handle the reins entrusted to him, nor where the road is, nor if he did know, would he be able to control the steeds. Then, for the first time, the cold bears grew hot with the rays of the sun, and tried, though all in vain, to plunge into the forbidden sea. And the serpent, which lies nearest the icy pole, ever before harmless because sluggish with the cold, now grew hot, and conceived great frenzy from that fire. They say that you also, Boeotes, fled in terror, slow though you were, and held back by your clumsy ox cart. But when the unhappy Phaeton looked down from the top of heaven, and saw the lambs lying far, far below, he grew pale, his knees trembled with sudden fear, and over his eyes came darkness through excess of light. And now he would prefer never to have touched his father's horses, and repents that he has discovered his true origin, and prevailed in his prayer. Now, eager to be called the son of Merops, he is borne along just as a ship driven before the headlong blast, whose pilot has let the useless rudder go, and abandoned the ship to the gods and prayers. What shall he do? Much of the sky is now behind him, but more is still in front. His thought measures both, and now he looks forward to the west, which he is destined never to reach, and at times back to the east. Dazed, he knows not what to do. He neither lets go the reins, nor can he hold them, and he does not even know the horses' names. To add to his panic fear, he sees scattered everywhere in the sky strange figures of huge and savage beasts. There is one place where the scorpion bends out his arms into two bows, and with tail and arms stretching out on both sides, he spreads over the space of two signs. When the boy sees this creature reeking with black poisonous sweat, and threatening to sting him with his curving tail, bereft of wits from chilling fear, down he dropped the reins. When the horses feel these lying on their backs, they break loose from their course, and with none to check them, they roam through unknown regions of the air. Wherever their impulse leads them, there they rush aimlessly, knocking against the stars set deep in the sky, and snatching the chariot along through uncharted ways. Now they climb up to the top of heaven, and now, plunging headlong down, they course along nearer the earth. The moon, in amazement, sees her brother's horses running below her own, and the scorched clouds smoke. The earth bursts into flame, the highest parts first, and splits into deep cracks, and its moisture is all dried up. The meadows are burned to white ashes, the trees are consumed, green leaves and all, and the ripe grain furnishes fuel for its own destruction. But these are small losses which I am lamenting. Great cities perish with their walls, and the vast conflagration reduces whole nations to ashes. The woods are ablaze with the mountains. Athos is ablaze, Cilician Taurus, and Tmolus, and Eta, and Ida dry at last, but previously covered with springs, and Helicon, haunt of the Muses, and Hemus, not yet linked with the name of Oeagrus. Etna is blazing boundlessly with flames now doubled, and twin-peaked Parnassus, and Eryx, Cynthus, and Othris, and Rhodope, at last destined to lose its snows, Mimas and Dindama, Mycale, and Cithaeron, famed for sacred rites. Nor does its chilling clime save Scythia. Caucasus burns, and Ossa with Pindus, and Olympus, greater than both, and the heaven-piercing Alps, and cloud-capped Apennines. Then indeed does Phaeton see the earth aflame on every hand. He cannot endure the mighty heat, and the air he breathes is like the hot breath of a deep furnace. The chariot he feels growing white-hot beneath his feet. He can no longer bear the ashes and whirling sparks, and is completely shrouded in the dense hot smoke. In this pitchy darkness, he cannot tell where he is or where he is going, and is swept along at the will of his flying steeds. It was then, as men think, that the peoples of Ethiopia became black-skinned, since the blood was drawn to the surface of their bodies by the heat. Then also Libya became a desert, for the heat dried up her moisture. Then the nymphs with disheveled hair bewailed their fountains and their pools. Boeotia mourns the loss of Dirce, Argos, Amymone, Corinth, her Pyrean spring. Nor do rivers, whose lot had given them more spacious channels, remain unscathed. The Don's waters steam, old Peneus too, Mysian Caicus, and swift Ismenus, and Arcadian Erymanthus, Xanthus destined once again to burn, tawny Lycormus, and Meander playing along upon its winding way, Thracian Melis, and Laconian Eurotas, Babylonian Euphrates burns, Orontes burns, and swift Thermodon, the Ganges, Phasis, Danube, Alpheus boils, Spercheius banks are aflame. The golden sands of Tagus melt in the intense heat, and the swans, which had been wont to throng the Meonian streams in tuneful company, are scorched in mid-Caister. The Nile fled in terror to the ends of the earth, and hid its head, and is hidden yet. The 7 mouths lie empty, filled with dust, 7 broad channels, all without a stream. The same mischance dries up the Thracian rivers, Hebrus and Strymon. Also the rivers of the west, the Rhine, Rhone, Po, and the Tiber, to whom had been promised the mastery of the world. Great cracks yawn everywhere, and the light, penetrating to the lower world, strikes terror into the infernal king and his consort. Even the sea shrinks up, and what was but now a great watery expanse is a dry plain of sand. The mountains, which the deep sea had covered before, spring forth and increase the numbers of the scattered Cyclades. The fish dive to the lowest depths, and the dolphins no longer dare to leap curving above the surface of the sea into their wonted air. The dead bodies of sea calves float, with upturned belly, on the water's top. They say that Nereus himself, and Doris and her daughters, were hot as they lay hid in their caves. Thrice Neptune essayed to lift his arms and august face from out the water. Thrice did he desist, unable to bear the fiery atmosphere. Not so all-fostering earth, who, encircled as she was by sea, amid the waters of the deep, amid her fast-contracting streams which had crowded into her dark bowels and hidden there, though perched by heat, heaved up her smothered face. Raising her shielding hand to her brow and causing all things to shake with her mighty trembling, she sank back a little lower than her wonted place, and then in awful tone she spoke. "If this is your will, and I have deserved all this, why, O King of all the gods, are your lightnings idle? If I must die by fire, oh, let me perish by your fire, and lighten my suffering by thought of him who sent it. I scarce can open my lips to speak these words." The hot smoke was choking her. "See, my singed hair, and all ashes in my eyes, all ashes over my face. Is this the return, the reward you pay to my fertility and dutifulness? That I bear the wounds of the crooked plow and mattock, tormented year in, year out? That I provide kindly pasturage for the flocks, grain for mankind, incense for the altars of the gods? But grant that I have deserved destruction. What is the sea? What has your brother done? Why are the waters which fell to him by the third lot so shrunken, and so much further from your sky? But if no consideration for your brother, nor even for me, has weight with you, at least have pity on your own heavens. Look around. The heavens are smoking from pole to pole. If the fire shall weaken these, the homes of the gods will fall in ruins. See, Atlas himself is troubled, and can scarce bear up the white-hot vault upon his shoulders. If the sea perish in the land, and the realms of the sky, then are we hurled back to primeval chaos. Save from the flames whatever yet remains, and take thought for the safety of the universe." So spoke the earth, and ceased, for she could no longer endure the heat, and she retreated into herself and into the depths nearer the land of shades. But the Almighty Father, calling on the gods to witness, and him, above all, who had given the chariot, that unless he bring aid, all things will perish by a grievous doom, mounts on high to the top of heaven, where it is his wont to spread the clouds over the broad lands, where he stirs his thunders and flings his hurtling bolts. But now he has no clouds with which to overspread the earth, nor any rains to send down from the sky. He thundered, and balancing in his right hand a bolt, flung it from beside the ear at the charioteer, and hurled him from the car, and from life as well, and thus quenched fire with blasting fire. The maddened horses leap apart, wrench their necks from the yoke, and break away from the parted reins. Here lie the reins, there the axle torn from the pole, in another place the spokes of the broken wheels, and fragments of the wrecked chariot are scattered far and wide. But Phaeton, fire ravaging his ruddy hair, is hurled headlong, and falls with a long trail through the air, as sometimes a star from the clear heavens, although it does not fall, still seems to fall. Him, far from his native land, in another quarter of the globe, Eridanus receives and bathes his steaming face. The Naiads in that western land consign his body, still smoking with the flames of that forked bolt, to the tomb, and carve this epitaph upon his stone. Here Phaeton lies. In Phoebus' car he fared, and though he greatly failed, more greatly dared. The wretched father, sick with grief, hid his face. And if we are to believe report, one whole day went without the sun. But the burning world gave light, and so even in that disaster was there some service. But Clymene, after she had spoken whatever could be spoken in such woe, melancholy and distraught and tearing her breast, wandered over the whole earth, seeking first his lifeless limbs, then his bones. His bones at last she found, but buried on a river bank in a foreign land. Here she prostrates herself upon the tomb, drenches the dear name carved in the marble with her tears, and fondles it against her breast. The Heliads, her daughters, join in her lamentation, and pour out their tears in useless tribute to the dead. With bruising hands beating their naked breasts, they call night and day upon their brother, who never more will hear their sad laments, and prostrate themselves upon his sepulchre. 4 times had the moon with waxing crescent reached her full orb, but they, as was their habit, for use had established habit, were mourning still. Then one day the eldest, Phaethusa, when she would throw herself upon the grave, complained that her feet had grown cold and stark, and when the fair Lampetia tried to come to her, she was held fast as by sudden roots. A third, making to tear her hair, found her hands plucking at foliage. One complained that her ankles were encased in wood, another that her arms were changing to long branches, and while they look on those things in amazement, bark closes round their loins, and by degrees their waists, breasts, shoulders, hands, and all that was free were their lips, calling upon their mother. What can the frantic mother do but run as impulse carries her, now here, now there, and print kisses on their lips? That is not enough. She tries to tear away the bark from their bodies, and breaks off slender twigs with her hands. But as she does this, bloody drops trickle forth as from a wound, and each one, as she is wounded, cries out, "Oh, spare me, mother, spare, I beg you. It is my body that you are tearing in the tree. And now, farewell." The bark closed over her latest words. Still their tears flow on, and these tears, hardened into amber by the sun, drop down from the new-made trees. The clear river receives them and bears them onward, one day to be worn by the brides of Rome. Sickness, the son of Sthenelus, was a witness of this miracle. Though he was kin to you, O Phaeton, by his mother's blood, he was more closely joined in affection. He, abandoning his kingdom, for he ruled over the peoples and the great cities of Liguria, went weeping and lamenting along the green banks of the Eridanus, and through the woods which the sisters had increased. And as he went, his voice became thin and shrill, white plumage hid his hair, and his neck stretched far out from his breast. A web-like membrane joined his reddened fingers, wings clothed his sides, and a blunt beak his mouth. So sickness became a strange new bird, the swan. But he did not trust himself to the upper air and Jove, since he remembered the fiery bolt which the god had unjustly hurled. His favorite haunts were still pools and spreading lakes. And hating fire, he chose the water for his home, as the opposite of flame. Meanwhile, Phoebus sits in gloomy mourning garb, shorn of his brightness, just as when he is darkened by eclipse. He hates himself in the light of day, gives over his soul to grief adds rage, and refuses to do service to the world. Enough, he says. From time's beginning has my lot been unrestful. I am weary of my endless and unrequited toils. Let any else who chooses drive the chariot of light. If no one will, and all the gods confess that it is beyond their power, let Jove himself do it, that sometime at least, where he essays to grasp my reins, he may lay aside the bolts that are destined to rob fathers of their boys. Then will he know, when he has himself tried the strength of those fiery-footed steeds, that he who failed to guide them well did not deserve death. As he thus speaks, all the gods stand around him and beg him humbly not to plunge the world in darkness. Jove himself seeks to excuse the bolt he hurled, and to his prayers adds threats in royal style. Then Phoebus yokes his team again, wild and trembling, still with fear, and in his grief fiercely plies them with lash and goad. Fiercely he plies them, reproaching and taxing them with the death of their master, his son. But now the Almighty Father makes a round of the great battlements of heaven and examines to see if anything has been loosened by the might of fire. When he sees that these are firm with their immortal strength, he inspects the earth and the affairs of men. Yet Arcadia, above all, is his most earnest care. He restores her springs and rivers, which hardly dare as yet to flow. He gives grass again to the ground, leaves to the trees, and bids the damaged forests grow green again. And as he came and went upon his tasks, he chanced to see a certain Arcadian nymph, and straightway the fire he caught grew hot to his very marrow. She had no need to spin soft wools, nor to arrange her hair in studied elegance. A simple brooch fastened her down, and a white fillet held her loose flowing hair. And in this garb, now with a spear, and now a bow in her hand, was she arrayed as one of Phoebe's warriors. Nor was any nymph who roamed over the slopes of Menelaus in higher favor with her goddess than was she. But no favor is of long duration.